Blake is one of the great revolutionary poets in the Republican tradition, and alongside Milton and Shelley. And he's also he was an original painter, and he also was I think one of the most interesting, imaginative forerunners of anarchism and liberation ecology. And I'll explain why this is the case. But although Blake is so original, he doesn't come from nowhere. He actually stands in a very long dissenting tradition, going back to the sisters and brothers of the free spirit during the medieval ages, and the ranters and diggers in during the English Revolution. He drew on a Hermetic tradition which goes right back to the wisdom of ancient Egypt. But anyway, this tradition that he came across in people like Jacob Boehm and Swedenborg carried on in London in obscure sects like the Muggletonians and the Taskites, if people wish to explore that. So he's not suddenly out of the blue, and he was, as you say, rooted in London. He was born, appropriately enough, in 1757 in Broad Street, off Golden Square, and really that was his spirit. And his father was a hosier, neither rich nor poor, and at the age of 10, the young William went to a drawing school and then became an apprentice engraver. So he's also very much aware of the effects of the satanic mills of the Industrial Revolution threatening his own craft as an engraver. And then he went for very briefly to work with Joshua Reynolds at the British Academy, and which he rejected and hated his work, which he felt depressed the imagination. And so he then went off on his own course, very obscure for most of his life, living in poverty, and often having to engrave the works of men with far less imagination and spirit. He was fortunate in meeting his companion Catherine, who was the daughter of a Battersea market gardener. It was also worth remembering that London that time was very much close to the fields. So just as he saw the angels in the trees, that there were market gardens, and there was a sense of England's green and pleasant land encroaching on the city. He was largely ignored and neglected, and it was only through towards the end of his life there was a small group of painters, including Samuel Palmer, who began to appreciate him. Palmer, for instance, likened him rather to Socrates, saying that he was a man without a mask, his aim simple, his path straightforward, his wants few, and therefore he was happy, noble and free. Catherine talked about him being, when they would live together, they had a small place in Lambeth, and the story goes that one day a friend came to visit them, and he found them both naked, sitting under a vine in the summer sun, under an unpruned vine. And he simply said, come in, it's only Adam and Eve, you know. So he had this sense of that he continued to live in a world of innocence. He was very much aware of the fall of humanity and the tyranny of empire and government. But he still had this wonderful sense of a good life. So I think that the love of freedom really inspires all his work. And he is very much a dialectical thinker. The sense he sees that, for instance, he says that without opposition, or without, there is no progression. And again he says opposition is true friendship. And in his sort of cosmic view of things, he saw this opposition not only between the state and church and the people, but also between liberty and authority, between good and evil, between heaven and hell, between Jesus and the tradition of Jehovah God. And it's really out of this clash that people and society and the spiritual life evolves. And he was, although some Marxists have tried to claim him because he was a great radical, he was actually an idealist in the sense that he thought that the humans are just organised spirit. But nevertheless, although and in his work, and both in his poetry and art, he tried to show the purer forms of what we see in front of us with the mortal eye in the everyday world. He used the divine arts of the imagination, and he was also, which I think also makes him this. But although he was an idealist in a philosophical sense, he was very much rooted as in London, in British society. He was also what's called a nominalist, in the sense he believed he was particularly interested in particulars. That's why he celebrates the clod and the hedgehog, the pebble, exactly, and the tree. These little things in nature, which can also take you to the farthest part of the cosmos, because he's one of those people who could see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower, and hold infinity in the palm of his hand, and experience eternity in an hour. So he goes. There is a correspondence between heaven and earth, between the macrocosm of the universe and the microcosm of the individual, which comes through in his work. But as I say, he was rooted in the social experience of London at the end of the 18th century, and just as in his own life he had disappointment in that he was not recognised. When he put on an exhibition of his paintings, he didn't sell any. His poems collections didn't really go. He saw also great disappointment after his high hopes after the American Revolution, and then also with the French Revolution. And he was, as with Wordsworth and Godwin, he was electrified. And as Wordsworth said, at dawn it was to be alive, but to be young was very heaven at that particular time. And Blake went around London with the Liberty cap, with a sort of French revolutionary bonnet rouge, which unfortunately, but then he was forced to take it off when Pitt went to war with France. There was a great reaction in Britain. There was a patriotic fervour which we unfortunately see on a regular basis, and then the introduction of the gagging acts, which to silence the radicals. And Blake himself, reacting to that, also was almost tried for high treason, which was a hanging matter. And it was when he was down in Felpham, a drunken soldier at this time burst through his small gate of his garden, and he allegedly, Blake, pushed him out, saying, "Damn the king, all you soldiers are sold for slaves." And he may well have said that because it's entirely in keeping, because in one of his notebooks he writes, "Every man hates a king," and he was a really ardent Republican. But as I say, it could be a hanging matter. But there's a jury of sound men from Chichester, not far from Bognor, found him not guilty. But because of this threat to his own personal life, he then came back to London, and he also started developing his visions of a free world and his criticism of his existing society, the church and the state, in very complex allegories, the allegories of his prophetic writings.